Now let's talk about pitfalls and things that we just have to avoid, things that I've seen time and time again because I don't want to see it anymore. So the first pitfall of writing a personal statement that you have to avoid by all means necessary is, and that child was me. What do I mean by that child was me? We've all seen the melodramatic, the long drawn out drama series. They're creating like this hypothetical situation, and this person has something traumatic happen to them, like crazy traumatic. They lost both of their parents. They got shot. They lost a leg. In the very last, parts of this show that's so melodramatic, they say, "And do you remember the girl that I talked about who had her leg blown off? Well, that child was me." We knew it. We knew it from the start. We knew it. We knew it. Please, please, please avoid using that kind of trope. Avoid using that kind of plot. Avoid using that kind of format because it's almost laughable. Don't do it. It's not going to benefit you. And you don't want someone to read your personal statement and kind of laugh, especially if it wasn't intended to be funny, okay? So avoid that trope, avoid that pitfall. So the next pitfall I'm going to talk about is something that I coached my students in speech and debate not to do. Just because the world that we live in is very polarized. The pitfall that you have to avoid is not mention any polarizing topics. For example, abortion, especially now, politics, and I'm just going to throw in there religion, simply because you just don't know how some people feel. These topics are polarizing. What do I mean? I mean that someone either agrees with abortion or they don't. That's it. Someone is a Republican or they're a Democrat. That's it. And so they're so polarizing that if you choose to write about it, you're doing yourself a disservice because you only have a 50% chance that the person that picks up your application will agree with you, okay? So what happens if you talk about abortion, for example, and someone picks up your application and they're rating your application and they're pro-life? They're just going to toss your application to the side. That's why I always say stay away from polarizing topics. And I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm currently a medical student, and this is going back to us being, us trying not to be tone deaf and understanding our surroundings. If you're pre-med, you're not a doctor. If you're a medical student, you're applying for residency. You're still not a doctor, okay? So it's highly, 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 highly unlikely that a person who, for example, is pro-life will pick up your personal statement that talks about the right to an abortion and they will say, "Wow, this 22-year-old really changed my mind. They really changed the opinion that I had for the past 25 years. It is highly unlikely. So stay away from these polarizing topics because if you don't, you're literally doing yourself a disservice, and it's 50% chance that they won't even continue to read your personal statement because they simply don't agree with what you're talking about. Okay? Now I'm going to talk about something that I mentioned in the introduction. I talked about describing the scene. This is a pitfall that we want to avoid. Remember I said don't describe it too much. That's what I want everyone to avoid when they're choosing to be very descriptive. No one wants to read a personal statement and the writer spent 2 paragraphs talking about a brown-skinned girl that approached me and she was wearing a long-sleeve gray sweatshirt and it said Duke in blue, or was it aqua? And as she approached me, I started sweating. Did I know her? How do I know her? And so it's just like, no one wants to read a paper that is super duper duper descriptive because one, it's fluff. You're not saying anything. You don't need to describe the scene that much. Second of all, it's fluff and it's taking up space. It's taking up space for you to say actually important things, okay? And then finally, it's laughable. It's just like, I'm reading a personal statement and I'm saying, I came to read a personal statement, not a prose piece or not like a dramatic, slam poetry entry. So make sure you're not overly descriptive. These are going to be my last two pitfalls that I'm going to talk about in this video, and I'll wrap up the video. And I want to preference these pitfalls by saying I am very, very, very aware of plights, of adversity, of obstacles that people face. I'm very aware of it. I'm very sincere that people have encountered, loss of loved ones, have encountered family members that have been diagnosed with terminal illnesses and they're dealing with that. They've encountered all these tragedies. So I understand that. So these are the 2 points that I want to make. The first one is going to be about COVID. And this is a suggestion, as a third-year medical student transitioning into my 4th year in a few months, I would suggest that you not write about COVID. And if you are to write about it, that not be the main thing that you talk about in your essay or in your personal statement. So why do we not do that? Or why should we not do that? Well, one, this goes back to the idea of knowing your audience. Your audience are physicians. Your audience, are PhD holders, they're epidemiologists, they're pharmacists, they're people that work in the medical school. And so they know firsthand what COVID has done. A lot of these people are still practicing. And so a lot of them have already experienced death of their colleagues. A lot of them are working extra hours because of COVID. A lot of people and a lot of them who are reviewing your application know firsthand what COVID is about. That being said, to my knowledge, all medical students have been pulled from school during the height of this pandemic. All graduate schools, for the most part, have been pulled from the institution. So it's not like any of us are in the ER, donning our PPE that was reused because we ran out and, I walked into the COVID area sweating but ready to take the temperatures of patients. No, it's just like we're all at home, right? We're all at home studying from home. And then on top of that, even if you aren't at home, even if you had some type of, was able to deal with COVID in a medically related way for school, that can't be in comparison to what our physicians are facing. Even if it is, you don't want to make that comparison. You don't want to say, hey, I actually experienced something very crazy with COVID. You might have too, but listen to my story. It comes off as insincere and it comes off as tone deaf. And that's why I use it as a suggestion. Just don't do it, because you don't want to encounter that one physician that just lost a colleague or that hasn't seen, their son or daughter in weeks because of COVID, or they're remembering all of that happened to them because of COVID, and then they pick up your personal statement and you're talking about COVID and you're talking about, how, you were able to do this and you were able to do that and blah, blah, blah. It's just like, they're going to take your personal statement and they're going to say, get a load of this guy. Like, they really think they were doing something during COVID. And I want to say, I'm not saying that whatever happened to you during COVID was not monumental, was not life-changing, was not, scary. Some people have lost people. I'm not saying that that's not the case. I am saying that I want everyone to kind of avoid avoid those pitfalls, so it doesn't make it seem like you're not being sincere. Because it could be the case that something very tragic happened to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how it's going to be received. So that is just my little soapbox about COVID. I did not mention COVID. I think I have a sentence about it, but it's like a metaphor sentence, and I'm gonna pull it up here. But other than that, I do not talk about COVID. I mean, I'm not in school. And there's a reason why I'm not in school. And there's a reason why, people are dying. And it's doctors and nurses and, everyone on the medical staff and people that help run the hospital and nursing homes and etc. that are fighting this battle. So I'm choosing not to talk about it. Okay? The next tip kind of goes along with that, with knowing your audience. The next tip is basically, again, I'm going to preface this with I understand people have gone through things. It's going to be about death. Specifically, if you have experienced a death in the family, or if someone has had a terminal illness or anything of that nature. I'm not going to say don't talk about it. I am going to say if you choose to talk about death or something traumatic, you have to show why you even talked about it, and then how did it change you? Going back to what I said earlier, how did this death change you? And the reason why I'm saying this is because I've seen a lot of personal statements with pre-med students, and someone in their family passed away, unfortunately. And they say, this is why I'm motivated to be a doctor. And then someone reads it and they're just like, okay. Okay. And that's the kind of response that a lot of people get. It's just, yes, it's unfortunate that someone died, but why does that make you want to be a doctor? And a lot of the times that event and why they want to be a doctor, the link between it is not clear at all. So then what it comes off as is you're trying to use it as like a double-sided coin. You're trying to say, this is my motivation. But on the other side, you're literally trying to say, I kind of want you guys to give me pity. Like I had a death in the family, or my mom has cancer, or this is the case. And so you never want to be put in a position where people think that you're using a personal tragedy to your advantage, or you're using a personal tragedy to garner pity. That's not the case. And I will say, disclaimer, I've experienced both in my family. I've experienced a lot of that while in medical school. And so I will say that in my previous personal statements, if I mentioned anything about a family tragedy, it was very brief, 2 to 3 sentences at the most. And then almost the rest of my personal statement was the evolution of my life after that. So it should be, this event happened to me. And then most of the statement after that is talking about how did that event make you feel? What changes did you do because of that event? What concrete, measurable, tangible things can we look at and say, wow, this event really, really, really changed her? Because it's one thing to say, my mom passed away because of breast cancer, and that's what pushed me to apply to medicine because, I'm all about community health now and being, taking preventative measures. And it's another thing to say, my mom died of breast cancer. And from that day forward, I realized how important community health was, to the point where I teamed up with, this group, and we started doing blood pressure screenings, and we started doing, wellness exams, and we started signing people up to have a primary care physician in my community. And I've been doing this for the past 3 or 4 years. And then on top of that, I realized that it's not just breast cancer, it's not just screenings, it's not just X, Y, and Z that, we need. And that's, it's not just something that, my mom's death that we need, but it's an array of stuff that we're missing. And this only makes me want to, help more. This only makes me want to apply to be a doctor even more, because I just had this blinder on seeing my mom pass away or my mom have breast cancer, when in reality, it's so much more than that. It's so much more than my mom. And that what I just said may sound insincere, but the idea is know your audience. The people that have read personal statements deal with death all the time. They're physicians. Their patients at some point do pass away. That's part of the job. But also on top of that, you won't be the only student applying talking about death. you'll be 1 in 1,000, you'll be 1 in 2,000, depending on what school you apply to. You'll be 1 in some large number that has now talked about some death or some tragedy in their family, and then you become like a stack of papers. Like, you literally become a number, because they're gonna say, oh, instead of saying, oh, I really love Jasmine Allen, I really loved her application, they're gonna say, oh, what's the girl, the breast cancer girl, or the mom, you know. And you don't want that to happen to you when they're discussing your application, okay? Those last 2 pitfalls, I just want to emphasize again. Everyone is allowed to have emotions, to react to family tragedies in the ways that they choose to react to it. No one deserves to say that you don't have the right to feel that way. There's a time and a place in which we can talk about that tragedy in a beneficial way. A lot of the times when I'm looking at personal statements, it's not beneficial. It's more so, this death happened, let me into medical school, or this death happened, let me into this residency program. And med school is so much more than that, and residency programs are so much more than death, okay? So I really hope that these tips were very, very beneficial to you. This is something that I literally use all the time when I'm writing personal statements. I'm always trying to figure out how to form, answer that prompt 1, and then figure out what type of event is going to take me, to the end, and what type of event am I going to be using to create this vehicle. And so I use these tips, and if you felt like these tips were useful to you, go ahead and subscribe. This is going to be part of the Applying to Medical School series, so I'm going to be coming out with more videos, hopefully within the next few days, in which I talk about the whole application process and how to make yourself a better applicant. Other than that, if you feel like you know someone that probably needs to hear this, go ahead and shoot them my YouTube channel. And if not, I'm also on Instagram, and I'm also on Twitter. So subscribe, like, and then comment anything that you'd like to hear, or comment any type of suggestions that you'd like me to hear. And other than that, you guys stay healthy, stay inside, stay home.